To continue on the inherent powers, this one is we are going to discuss about the on the impairment of the obligation of contracts when we are going to exercise the eminent domain. So it can impair a contract just like with the police power. So sabi ng batas ng Constitution, the impairment clause guarantees that no laws impairing obligation of contracts. So this is not absolute kasi pagdating sa eminent domain, it can impair. So it sits lower in the hierarchy of constitutional values compared to the state's inherent powers. So kumbaga, supreme ang police power at saka yung eminent domain. Both supreme over the contract. So mas mataas sila. Okay, ito yung mga detalyado na explanation. So first is the Supreme Court, there's an implied reservation just like with the police power kanina na pag mayroong contract, if you are executing, it is implied that that has to comply or that can be revoked with the exercise of the police power kasi yung public needs is superior over the other. Okay? So the Supreme Court has consistently ruled na lahat ng contracts made by private, mayroon talagang understood na mayroong implied na reservation. This means that every contract is written with the understanding that the state retains sovereign power, okay, to enact the general welfare. So always na ganon. There is always an implied reservation. So ngayon, nang mag-exercise yung state of the eminent domain, it is exercising a superior right, overrides private agreement. So lahat ng private agreements na yan, that is a contract, pwede niyang i-override kung anong nandun. Kung hindi consistent doon sa gusto ng eminent domain, I mean, kung mayroong contract tapos gusto ng eminent domain na it has to be ended kasi kailangan nila yung property na yan, then it has to be ended. Ngayon, yung state needs a piece of land, for example, a highway. The fact that the land is currently leased under the 10-year contract, it will not stop the expropriation. Hindi pwedeng, this 10-year contract, again, cannot stop the expropriation. The eminent domain. Eminent domain, the exercise of that is by way of expropriating land. Kukunin yung land. Okay, number 2 is eminent domain versus non-impairment. So, if may conflict, the private contract prevents the government from using specific property for the public. So, yun yung conflict. Ang resolution, ang private contract daw must yield. Magbigay daan doon sa public good. So, the government, pwede niyang kukunin yung or i-impair niya yung contract tapos kunin yung property kahit na nakakontrata pa yan sa other private entity. The condition is, unlike with the police power, ang police power is wala siyang ibabayad kasi ang kanya is to regulate, i-restrain niya, baguhin niya. Itong eminent domain naman, in order to take effect, kailangan magbayad siya. Mayroon tinatawag na just compensation. Bakit? Sa pagkakataon kasi ito, mayroong kinukuha na property. Sa police power, ito is only a restraining of the property, not taking. So dito sa government, kailangan niya na magbayad. So the government must not only pay the land but potentially for the value of the rights contracts extinguished. Babayaran niya yung kung yung mga damages na nandun if they constitute compensable property interest. Kasi halimbawa may mga infrastructure na din napatayo, then the government has to pay that kung ganun, kung may mga existing. Kasi that's also damages. So that's why in the executing of the eminent domain, there's always an observation pagdating sa due process of law. Hindi yan mawawala. There's always a procedure, bigay sila ng notice, then there is always a chance for the private entity na mag-reply sila, tapos again, meron namang hearing, mga ganun. Ito yung example dito, ang Republic of the Philippines versus PLDT. Ang nangyari kasi dito, classic to ito. Wanted to the Bureau of Telecommunication. This is the Republic, ha. Yung Bureau of Telecommunication, siyang representative ng Republic, wanted to interconnect with PLDT's lines. So yung PLDT naman refuse kasi citing its private property and the rights of the contracts, etc. So ang ruling ng Supreme Court, while the state daw cannot enforce PLDT to enter into contract, which is, yes, cannot enforce to enter into a contract. But in here naman, as it is the compulsion, it can use the power of eminent domain to compel the interconnection of the lines provided just compensation is paid. The public need for a unified phone system kasi daw overrode the PLDT's private exclusivity. Again, overrode. Because of, ano daw? Public. Kasi always ito at the top. Okay. Siya ang unahin. So because of that, it allowed the exercise of the eminent domain, that is compelling the interconnection of the lines. Dito naman sa ikalawa, nangyari dito is ang more electric at saka yung Power Corp versus the PECO. So sabi dito, ang more electric was granted franchise to distribute the power of Iloilo, replacing the old franchise holder PECO. Ang law allowed more to expropriate PECO distribution's asset. Kumbaga, pag take over niya, kung ano man yung nandun kay PECO, pwede yung i-allow ng bylaw na kunin yung lahat. Yan, eminent domain yan na kunin yung lahat ng mga assets ni PECO na existing na ginagamit. Pero, again, babayaran. Okay? So, argument si PECO naman is, sabi daw niya, impaired its rights and was a corporate takeover. Sabi ng Supreme Court, nag-upheld siya ng expropriation. Ang ibig sabihin niya na, di okay yan, yung expropriation. Ang kanyang rulings is, it ruled that the eminent domain daw can be delegated. Pwede yung gawin ng private utility. Ang bago na kasi ngayon na is more electric. So, pwede yung gawin na i-expropriate niya yung assets ni PECO, ang dating franchise holder, by way of the exercise of eminent domain. Kasi ang purpose naman is for public. Okay? That is the distribution of electricity. So, ngayon, yung PECO's ownership of the rights and also the contractual relations with the customers had to yield to the state's authority to entrust the public utility service to a new franchisee. So that's it. So something is a different case kasi ang dito kasi it is exercised by the entity, and what we can learn from here is that pwede palang i-take over yung corporation if that particular, by way of the exercise of eminent domain, if that particular is for the public good. Okay? So that's one of the really very like it's not very common for us to encounter such a case. That's a landmark, unusual. Now here I think we have already discussed this outriggers versus LU. So when is the exercise invalid? So maging invalid lang yung eminent domain kung hindi siya for public use, kung walang ibinabayad na just compensation, kung violation siya sa due process of law. So ganon pa rin, nandun pa rin always. So to summarize, in the Philippines, ang private contract cannot stand, take note of this, in a way of a valid expropriation project. So the states need to build road, hospital, yun kasi yung kailangan mayroong ganon. It's deemed more important than preserving the right. More important than preserving the right of the lease agreement or whatever contract is that. So yung remedy na lang is just compensation. Kailangan makareceive siya ng bayad doon sa kanyang pag-surrender ng kanyang private properties. Okay, so that's all with the explanation with regard to the why contract. Medyo malalim kasi pagdating diyan. Dito naman sa transfer of rights, ito yung another difference ng taxation ng three inherent powers. First, taxes paid become part of the public funds. Yes. While here, restrained. Walang kinokolekta dito. May kinokolekta but that is That is for the maintenance of the cost recovery. It will not go to the public funds. Dito naman sa eminent domain is effected in favor of the state. Ang dito kinukuha lang yung property in favor of the state. Ito yung property is restraining lang. Ito yung ginagawa nila, restraining. Next, so all persons rights, ito yung coverage na affected. Ganito din yung kanyang scope. Sa eminent domain, only a particular property. Take note ha, only a particular property. So, dito sa delegation naman, as to the differences, so this is very important for us to know. Okay, una-una, when it comes to delegation, hindi pwedeng i-delegate yung taxation. Pero mayroon tayong nalalaman na exception granted by the Constitution. So, si Constitution nagbigay doon. Pero, without that, it is vested exclusively in the legislative body. Ganon din yung police power, vested exclusively in the legislative body. Dito, naturally, it can be delegated by the legislature. Delegable ito. It is easily. Kumbaga, kahit na walang exception na ginawa ng Constitution, it can be easily delegated by the legislature. Sa legislature mismo ang mag-delegate. Exceptions naman to non-delegability, the power may be delegated to local LGU. So, yon. Ito yung number 1. Kalawa, to the President. Ikatlo, to administrative, yung sa BIR. But only for mere ministerial. Itong delegation na to, again, not levying, not exercise of power. Okay? Ito naman, pagdating dito, pwede ito ma-delegate sa local. Okay? And other administrative bodies. Okay? Sa administration lang to, like for example, sa PNP, execution of the police power. But again, for administrative, it's not exercise of police power. Dito naman, delegation is permissible. Siya din pero okay, again, pwede ito siya sa local LGU, magkapareha sila. At pwede siya sa public utility and other private. Pero again, public utility companies lang yung and that is for the public purpose always. Yun yung kanyang purpose or goal. And reason for non-delegability, example dito, is a pure legislative. That is one of the reasons. That's one reason, right? The legislative body is responsible to the electorate. Okay? Kumbaga, yung nagboto sa kanya, this political responsibility cannot be surrendered. Kaya bawal siya i-delegate. Except lang kasi sinabi ng Constitution. The legislative body must determine, ito yung sa police power ha, police power ito. What is necessary, okay, and what measures. Siya lang yung may alam sa legislative body, kaya hindi niya pwedeng i-delegate. Okay? Dito naman, the authority only concerns implementation. Ang delegation dito is implementation. And while the power itself remains legislative. Okay? Please take note. Now, somehow confusing really, right? Kasi dito, purely legislative daw, pero that is exempted by the Constitution. Ang ibig lang sabihin lang yan is, the legislative body has no power on its own. Wala siyang power on its own. Parang pwede niyang i-delegate unless provided the Constitution. So ngayon, pag walang Constitution, hindi siya pwede. Ito naman, kahit walang Constitution, pagdating sa eminent domain, kahit walang exception sa Constitution, pwede yang i-delegate. That's why it can be delegated easily by the legislative body. Ito, just like with the taxation, it cannot be delegated because, again, ang police power, ang legislative body lang yung mag-determine talaga kung ano yung necessary. Kasi if that is to be delegated with the other, baka magkakaroon ng iba't ibang imposition ng mga rules and laws pagdating dyan. So, therefore, it has to be only with the legislative body, yung pag-exercise ng police power. That's all. Thank you for this.